is I, Tantus Naravan Jacobin, Lord and Emperor of the Jacobin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on Earth Dawn. Last time when we left off, we were talking about astral space, and I brought up astral sensing, a lesser version of astral perception, allowing you to sort of sense without some of the danger. Let's talk about the mechanics of astral sensing. Astral sensing is traditionally used to look and see if an item would necessarily be magical. Of course, you can kind of dive into it and tell what other things have patterns, but items are the traditional one that you're going to actually be looking into and using astral sensing to kind of glean some knowledge from it. Granted, you could always look at other things, but as you said, the patterns of living things and the patterns of items are completely different. First step, of course, is going to be opening up your senses and beginning to astrally sense and to tell what auras are nearby, what kind of imprints and patterns are existing nearby to you, what objects are perhaps magical, what other creatures and things that are alive are around you. Once you do this, you want to make a astral sensing test 6 being the spell defense of astral space. Success means that you, of course, would begin your sensing. This is modified by the region, by the same difficulties I talked about previously when talking about regions, the same additional difficulty numbers. You're going to use that same one when adding in sensing in this area. It's going to have that same kind of interference. If you beat that 6, but did not beat the region, the defense of that, then you will know that that's because of some kind of corruption or interference that you are not being able to tell it. You are understanding that. It's not just like, oh, I normally would be able to sense it. I'm not sensing it right now. I must have just failed anyway. No, you would know. It's like, oh, there's some kind of corruption here interfering with my senses. Once you're successful, of course, you can tell a number of things. You can tell what items are magical, what items are not magical and not have auras. You could also tell what kind of region you're actually in. If you were successful, you could be like, oh, I managed to overcome a corrupt region. Oops, I'm not in a good place. You can also kind of get an idea when the non-magical items, you can kind of tell where they are, all like the locations of one, they're kind of just obscured, but you do get a sense of where everything is around you. The thing is, these non-magical, non-living things do cause an obscurance. So like if there's a magical item on the other side of, let's say, a desk, it would be obscuring it there. If I get good results on my test, I can actually pierce through that obscurity and see the thing there beyond it. So there is something to these like obscuring objects that you kind of will sense there too. They block other magic if there's enough of them. Now you can use astral sensing directly on a magic item once you've identified it. Then it's going to be against the magic item spell defense when of course you're sensing into it. And at that point in time, you can begin to peer into its pattern. If you're successful against that, you could start looking at that. You start getting gleaming bits of information, and the more successes you get, and you have to keep rolling it, astral sensing, keep concentrating on it, the more information you get, but the higher the difficulty gets. It gets a bonus each time. It gets more and more difficult to get more and more information from it. If you fail, well, it just means you've lost your connection of peering deep into this object with your astral sensing, and unfortunately that means you'd have to start over from scratch, from where you began with in the first place, in order to try to sense through all of its layers again. Now a magic item could obscure another magic item. If you get excellent results against the spell defense of the magic item in question, then you can peer through it. So if there's some kind of magical chest or box that's hiding something within it, you will be able to peer inside and see if there's something magical inside. But again, that's be excellent results against the object spell defense. Now you have to remember that everything with an imprint also has a pattern. But of course, every pattern for different types of things are different from all of the others. So when you're sensing into them, you get different things. If I'm sensing into an item, I can get things from it, from the pattern of it. When I'm dive into that pattern, I can get things like the name giver, the name of it that created it, perhaps the discipline of the person that created this, or use whatever magic pattern I'm kind of trying to dive into. Now, for the most part, most of the time, patterns occupy the same space as an imprint, especially for something like a name giver or a living object, then yeah, it's going to be. It's going to be the same space as it. My imprint will be my body. The pattern will be my imprint. Things like magic items begin to work differently. They'll have an imprint of the object that it is, but its pattern will occupy only a small space of it. So if I have a magic sword, the imprint would be the entire sword, but the pattern might only be in the hilt. Spells and magical abilities create an entirely different type of pattern. When you're sensing them, they appear as some kind of amorphous cloud of energy filling the area which the spell is taking effect. it's actually kind of a useful skill to use astral sensing in this, even in combat. In combat, I could tell what type of spell it is, what the circle of the spell is, and I could even glean some information about the person or creature that used this spell or magical effect to begin with. I could begin to glean this information. Of course, there's things you can get by doing this out of combat too, like sensing some kind of things ongoing pattern in an area, but regardless of which one you're doing, you're going against the spell's defense. The spell defense of the spell is what you're actually using it again. Now, as I mentioned in a previous episode, there are 3 ways of astrally sensing. Each of them has their own unique abilities and own unique advantages to using them. I'm going to be naming them in order of the most powerful to least powerful. So talking about the ones that gives you the most amount of information versus the ones that give you the least amount of information. There are drawbacks to using it, but of course, then again, it's the amount of information you want to glean. The first one is the astral sensing talent. Now, the talent is probably the strongest of all of them. It allows you to deep dive into information, and the fact is, because it's a talent, you can constantly raise your ability to deep dive deeper into your sensing and become better and better at it. The disadvantage of the entire thing is, of course, it causes strain. So you have to deal with strain when not only you're using it, but possible strain when you're doing other things while sensing if you need to do them. So there is this entire level that you could kick a lot of strain pretty quickly while using astral sensing the talent in this way. Granted, once you're done sensing, you have to worry about it a lot less, that you do lose some of that. But in the meantime, you're sort of like, effectively, you are straining yourself to sense in this way. Now, the next one is the astral sensing spell. This has some advantages that it functions very much like the astral sensing talent. Disadvantage that it only lasts for a certain number of hours, and it has a 30-foot range to it. So rather than just me like seeing, it has a range to the spell. That's the first disadvantage, and it has a limited amount of time. This means gleaming long-term information is really out of the question for the spell. When you, on the other hand, when you have hours upon hours to spend diving deep into the pattern of a magic item to learn everything you need to know about it, that's what you'd use the talent for. The spell, you're going to run out of time before you can actually get all that information, so of course it's not going to be nearly as useful. Much like the astral sensing before that I talked about, this one you're going to use a spellcasting 6 test. Effectively, you're using your spellcasting in the place of the astral sensing test from before, and it's the same difficulty of target number of the astral plane spell defense in order to see all the nearby magic items and patterns that are around you. And the last one is thread sight. Thread sight is the weakest of all of them. It's just to basically get an idea of a magic item's pattern for weaving threads into it, to have an idea of the threads that are within it to begin with, and to possibly put more into them. That's the entire purpose of it. When I look at a magic item, I cannot glean very much information. I could tell it's magical. I have to be concentrating directly on that. No check is required, but I can also then be able to basically pick apart where the threads are and where I could weave threads into it. And that'll be the point of it. This doesn't work on creatures or other living things. It only works on magic items, just to tell what kind of threads are associated with it. So that's it for today. I introduced you to, of course, how to use astral sensing, what the kind of tests are to do it, what kind of information you would really glean from it, and then the 3 types of astral sensing, I broke them down just a little bit more so you'd understand them more and understand the uses of them and the point of having astral sensing. In the next episode, I'm going to dive into the next type of magic, thread magic. There are a couple types of magics that they break down within the book that are going to be, you're probably going to use one of them, or you're going to know someone that uses one of them. So it's important to kind of get an idea of all 3 types. So if any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. Should support the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, linked in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.